Vanessa is such a worthless dumbass. Next month we're getting rid of her. Mark my words, she has no clue it's coming. The voice in the video was unmistakable. Henry Foster. My boss. My mentor. The man I had built my career under for 20 years. I stared at my phone, my fingers ice cold against the edges. The video, barely 30 seconds long, showed Henry at the company's annual staff party, whiskey glass in hand, surrounded by laughter. My coworkers, people I had worked alongside for decades, some chuckled, some shifted uncomfortably. But no one defended me. The video had been sent to me late last night by Alex, a junior analyst I had mentored since his first day. Thought you should see this before Monday. A sharp, acidic burn climbed up my throat. After 2 decades of unwavering loyalty, late nights, weekends, sacrificed birthdays, vacations missed just to make sure this company stayed afloat, I was nothing more than a punchline to them. I hit play again. She's so damn naive. Thinks she's irreplaceable. Watch this, next month we'll have a fresh face in her seat, and she won't even see it coming. The laughter. The smugness. I had covered for his mistakes, cleaned up his public blunders, and defended him when others whispered about his incompetence. And in return, this. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, the rage simmering beneath my skin. But beneath the anger, beneath the humiliation, there was something else. Something colder. Determination. At exactly 7:55 a.m., I walked into the office. Same as always. My heartbeat? Steady. My face? Composed. If Henry thought I was some clueless fool, blindly walking into my own execution, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. The office buzzed with its usual Monday morning chaos. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the bitter smell of burnt coffee clinging to the air. Henry's office door was wide open. He was leaned back in his chair, laughing with Brian, the CFO. I paused in the doorway. Act normal. Morning, Henry. I smiled, my voice light, effortless. His eyes flicked to me just for a second. There was something there. Hesitation? Guilt? No. Arrogance. Vanessa. Good weekend. I nodded. Great weekend. Feeling refreshed for another productive month. He smirked. That's what I like to hear. I bet it is. I turned and walked to my desk. And so the game began. For the next 4 weeks, I played my role to perfection. I smiled in meetings. I offered solutions. I took on extra work. I stayed late just like always. But beneath that, I was collecting everything I needed. Emails, contracts, financial reports. Things most people wouldn't think twice about. I thought twice about everything. And more importantly, I made sure someone else did too. I reached out to old clients, the ones who had stayed loyal to me. Not Henry. I dropped subtle hints about new opportunities. The response? Immediate interest. I contacted a corporate attorney, laying the groundwork for something that would hit Henry where it hurt the most. His wallet. His reputation. And, most importantly, I reached out to a competitor. A firm that had been circling Carter and Phillips for months, waiting for an opening to poach top talent. I wasn't just leaving. I was taking everything he took for granted with me. The morning of my final day, I arrived early. Henry still hadn't told me. He thought he'd catch me off guard, call me into his office with HR, and feed me some scripted speech about restructuring and budget constraints. He had no idea. I was 3 steps ahead. By the end of today, he would finally understand who the real fool was. I watched him from across the office, my polite smile masking the storm beneath my skin. So confident. So sure of himself. He thought he had one. But today I wasn't just getting fired. I was making sure this was the day everything started to fall apart for him. At 3 p.m., I saw Denise from HR walk into Henry's office. Her face? Carefully neutral. She didn't make eye contact with me. A few minutes later, my phone screen lit up. Henry Foster. Please come to my office at 3:30. There it was. I exhaled slowly, then stood, smoothed down my blouse. Showtime. I knocked once before stepping inside. Denise sat across from Henry, her company-issued folder neatly placed in front of her. Standard HR protocol. I had seen this play out before. Just never as the one on the receiving end. Henry put on his best fake sympathetic face. Vanessa, please have a seat. I did. We appreciate your dedication to the company over the last 20 years. He started, his voice measured, rehearsed. But as you know, the industry is evolving, and we've had to make some difficult decisions regarding staffing. I nodded as if this were brand new information. We've decided to restructure your role, and unfortunately, your position is being phased out. Denise slid the folder across the table. I didn't touch it. I could see relief flash across Henry's face. He had expected a reaction. Anger. Desperation. Pleading. Instead, I just smiled. I understand. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face. This was too easy for him. Too clean. He cleared his throat. We'll need your company laptop and access badge before the end of the day. And of course, we ask that you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding company operations. Oh, Henry, you have no idea. Of course. I stood, picking up the folder. Thank you for your time. And as I walked out of his office, I felt the weight of 20 years lift off my shoulders. Because now, I was free to burn everything to the ground. By 5 p.m. I was gone. But before I left, I sent one last email. Not to Henry. To his biggest client, the one that made up 40% of our company's revenue. It was short. Professional. Hi, Richard. I wanted to thank you for your partnership over the years. Given my upcoming departure from Carter & Phillips, I wanted to let you know I'll be available for consulting in the near future. Would love to discuss how I can continue assisting your company. I hit send. That email alone? More dangerous than any lawsuit. By Monday morning, Henry Foster was about to realize exactly how bad his mistake had been. Henry Foster, please come to my office at 3:30. There it was. I knocked once before stepping inside, a polite smile in place. Emily sat across from Daniel, her company-issued folder resting neatly in front of her. Classic HR protocol. I'd seen this process play out before, just never. Daniel leaned back in his chair, slipping on his best imitation of concern. Vanessa, please have a seat. He said. We truly appreciate your dedication to the company over the last 20 years. His voice was measured, almost rehearsed. But as you know, the industry is evolving, and we've had to make some difficult staffing decisions. He continued, seamlessly transitioning into the next scripted line. We've decided to restructure your role, and unfortunately, your position is being phased out. Emily slid the folder across the table. I didn't touch it. For a fraction of a second, I saw relief flicker in Daniel's eyes. He had expected something. Anger, pleading, confusion. Instead, I just smiled. I understand. My voice was calm. Too calm. A slight hesitation. A flicker of uncertainty. This was too easy. Too clean. He cleared his throat. We'll need your company laptop and access badge before the end of the day. And of course, we ask that you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding company operations. Of course, they wanted to make sure I left quietly. I simply watched him. Silent. Waiting. Daniel leaned in slightly, dropping his voice as if to feign sincerity. I know this must be difficult, but you're talented, Vanessa. I'm sure you'll land on your feet. I tilted my head, eyes locked onto his. Oh, I know I will. His jaw tensed, but he nodded. Just to clarify, this decision is final? He blinked, caught slightly off guard. Yes, of course. Perfect. I stood, lifting the folder as if it contained something valuable. I'll start wrapping up my work. Daniel exhaled, clearly eager to have this over with. We appreciate your professionalism. I smiled, turning toward the door. 20 years. And this was how it ended. But as I stepped out of his office, I felt something unexpected: relief. Because now I was free. The rest of the afternoon, I played my part flawlessly, packing up my desk, offering polite goodbyes, smiling at coworkers like this was just another day at the office. But behind the scenes, I was pulling the last strings of my plan. Before logging off for the final time, I methodically archived everything. Every email, every project file, every client contract I had access to. All perfectly legal. After all, I was still an employee until the end of the day. Then I composed one last email. Not to Daniel. To his biggest client. The one who made up 40% of our company's revenue. Subject: Thank you. Hi, Richard. I wanted to express my gratitude for your partnership over the years. Given my upcoming departure from Carter & Phillips, I wanted to let you know that I'll be available for consulting in the near future. I'd love to discuss how I can continue assisting your company. Let me know if you'd like to set up a call. Best, Vanessa. I hovered over the send button for half a second. Then I clicked. That email alone? More destructive than any lawsuit. At exactly 5 p.m., I walked out of the building for the last time. I didn't look back, because Daniel had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. Unknown number. I let it ring, stretching lazily against my pillows. A slow smile curled at the corner of my lips. Daniel was about to realize exactly how bad his mistake had been. I had expected at least a few days before the fallout started. I overestimated him. By 10 a.m., I had 3 missed calls from Carter & Phillips. By noon, a text from Alex. Alex, Vanessa, whatever you did, the office is in full meltdown mode. Jonathan Reed just pulled out of his contract. Daniel is losing it. I laughed out loud. Jonathan Reed, CEO of the very client I had sent that polite little email to. The one who had clearly seen the writing on the wall. No Vanessa, no stability, no reason to stay. Daniel had taken me for granted for 20 years. He thought I was replaceable. But the truth was, I had been the glue holding everything together. And now, that glue was gone. At 2:30 p.m. my phone buzzed again. I answered this time. Hello. My tone was pleasant, calm, a sharp exhale. Then, Vanessa. Daniel's voice was tight, strained. He was trying and failing to sound composed. I just heard about Richard. A forced chuckle. He mentioned you reached out. I did, I said simply. Silence. Daniel wasn't used to me being this unbothered. He tried again. Listen, I think there's been some miscommunication. Richard seemed to think you were leaving to work elsewhere. He got spooked. I'd love to clear things up. There it was. Daniel wanted me to fix his mess. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, savoring the moment. Now he needed me. Too bad for him, I was already gone. I leaned back in my chair, twirling my pen between my fingers, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then, smoothly, deliberately, I spoke. Daniel. My voice was almost amused. Almost. You told everyone I was a worthless idiot who wouldn't see it coming. So tell me, why would you need me now? Silence. His breathing tightened. He knew exactly what I was referencing. He tried again, slower this time. More careful. Vanessa. You know that was just office banter. I let out a soft chuckle, light, easy. But there was a razor edge to it. Office banter? A sharp inhale on his end. He wasn't laughing now. I leaned forward slightly, my tone deceptively pleasant. I don't hold grudges, Daniel. A pause. Just long enough to let the words settle. I just make smart decisions. And Richard? Well, he made one too. I heard the faintest sound, teeth gritting. Are you working for someone else? Desperation. He was scrambling, trying to piece together what my next move was. I smiled. I don't see how that's relevant to you. A long silence. Then the shift. The warning. This isn't a smart play, Vanessa, he said, his voice low. We have a lot of mutual contacts in this industry. There it was. He thought he could intimidate me. He still believed he had the upper hand. And that was his biggest mistake. After hanging up, I didn't waste a second. I pulled out my notes, flipping to the next page of my plan. Because Daniel was just the beginning. For the past 4 weeks, I had been in quiet discussions with his biggest competitors. The firms he secretly feared. The ones he publicly mocked in meetings but privately scrambled to undercut. And one in particular, they were very interested in what I had to offer. At 4 p.m., I walked into a sleek downtown office. The receptionist greeted me by name. They'd been expecting me. 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from Charles Morgan, CEO of Sterling & Company. He leaned forward, eyes sharp. I'll be honest, Vanessa. The moment I heard you were leaving Carter & Phillips, I had my team watching. And after today's news, he smirked. I think we both know Daniel's ship is sinking. I gave him a knowing smile. And you want to take advantage of that. Charles's grin widened. I want to make sure we both win. I had expected the offer. But I wasn't here just for a job. I wanted leverage. I reached into my bag and slid a folder across the table. These, I said, are projections based on my knowledge of Carter and Phillips's client base, upcoming renewals, and the weaknesses in their current contracts. If you want to take them down, this is where you start. Charles flipped through the pages, his expression darkening with satisfaction. Then he looked up. I assume you're not giving this away for free. I smiled. No, I'm not. His grin widened. Let's talk terms. By the time I left the office, the deal was sealed. I wasn't just joining Sterling and Company. I was bringing Carter and Phillips's clients with me. By next week, Daniel wouldn't just be losing contracts. He'd be bleeding out. And the best part? He still had no idea. Monday morning, the moment Carter and Phillips opened their doors, the first wave hit. Their inboxes were flooded with termination notices. 3 major clients, ones I had personally managed for years, were jumping ship. Sterling and Company had moved fast. Faster than Daniel ever could have anticipated. And I was watching it all unfold from the other side of the battlefield. At 8:15 a.m. my phone buzzed. A text from Alex. Alex. Holy shit, Vanessa. Daniel just stormed into the main office. He looks like he hasn't slept. I swear he's about to combust. I smirked. Good. Daniel had been so sure of himself, so convinced that I was just another disposable employee. But today he was realizing the truth. Losing me wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a catastrophe. By 9 a.m., the cracks had turned into full-blown fractures. Brian, the CFO, had locked himself in his office, desperately crunching numbers to figure out how much damage had been done. Legal was scrambling to review contracts, searching for a loophole, any loophole that could stop the bleeding. And Daniel? Daniel was on the phone with every executive contact he had, trying to convince them to stay. But it was already too late. The whispers were spreading. Clients were realizing just how unstable Carter and Phillips had become. And the worst part? Daniel had no idea who to blame. At noon my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Vanessa. Daniel's voice was tight, strained. He was trying to sound composed. He was failing. I leaned back in my chair, letting him sweat for a second. Then, Daniel. To what do I owe the pleasure? A sharp exhale. I don't know what the hell you've been telling people, but we have a serious problem. I arched an eyebrow, even though he couldn't see me. Oh? What kind of problem? His voice dropped, frustration bleeding through. You know damn well what kind. Miller's gone. And now 3 other major accounts have pulled out. That's millions in revenue disappearing overnight. A beat of silence. Then quieter. I need you to be straight with me. Did you? He stopped himself. He didn't want to say it. Did I orchestrate this? I let the silence stretch just long enough for him to sweat. Then calmly, carefully, I twisted the knife. I don't work for Carter and Phillips anymore, Daniel. A pause. What happens to your company isn't my concern. Silence. Then his voice sharpened. You're working for Sterling, aren't you? I smiled. I don't see how that's relevant to you. Daniel cursed under his breath. And just like that, he finally understood. You're making a mistake, Vanessa. This industry is small. You don't want to burn bridges. I let out a quiet laugh, the kind that wasn't meant to be funny. Daniel, you burned that bridge the moment you stood at that party and called me a worthless dumbass in front of the entire company. Silence. And then for the first time I heard it. Fear. This wasn't just bad luck. This was me. I could picture him now, sitting at his desk, his grip tightening on the phone, his power slipping through his fingers. The realization settling in, heavy and suffocating. He had underestimated me. And that was just the beginning. By 3 p.m., another update from Alex. Alex. Emergency board meeting just got called. Investors are freaking out. There's talk of replacing Daniel. I leaned back, pure satisfaction rolling through me. Because that had been part of my plan all along. Daniel had always hid behind me. Behind my work, my dedication. He had covered up his incompetence with my results. But now he had nowhere to hide. And in the corporate world, nothing kills a CEO faster than uncertainty and lost revenue. The next morning I made one final move. I walked into Carter and Phillips, not as an employee, but as a warning. The office was eerily quiet. The usual energy, gone, replaced with something thicker, heavier, tension, the kind you could cut with a knife. As I walked through the halls, heads turned. People whispered behind their screens, eyes darting in my direction. They knew. They all knew. And then I reached his office. I knocked. Come in. His voice was gruff, tired. I stepped inside. Daniel sat behind his desk, his tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes. The usual arrogance? Gone. I closed the door behind me and took a seat, mirroring the exact position we had been in just a week ago, when he fired me. I let the silence stretch. Then lightly, casually, I twisted the knife. How's it going, Daniel? His jaw clenched. Cut the crap, Vanessa. What do you want? I tilted my head. Me? I just wanted to see how you were doing. He let out a bitter laugh. Oh, you know how I'm doing. I smiled. I did. Then he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. The fight was slipping out of him now. Look, he took a slow breath. If there's a way to fix this, to make this right, what would it take? Ah, there it was. The desperation. The surrender. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice soft but firm. There's no fixing this, Daniel. His expression hardened, grasping for the last shreds of control. You think you've won? I stood, smoothing down my blazer. Met his eyes. I don't think I've won. A pause. I know I have. And just before I walked out for the last time, I turned back. Let him hear the final words he never saw coming. Enjoy unemployment, Daniel. Then I walked away, leaving him in the ruins of the empire he once thought was untouchable. Friday morning. Daniel thought he could contain the damage. A few phone calls. A little damage control. Maybe a couple of empty promises. But by the end of the week, Carter and Phillips wasn't just bleeding. It was hemorrhaging. And the world was watching it happen in real time. The headlines hit like a shockwave. Major client exodus at Carter and Phillips. CEO under fire as company crumbles. Sterling and Company acquires key clients in strategic move. Is this the end for CNP? Executive shakeup imminent. Investors lose faith in Henry Foster's leadership. Every business journal, every financial blog, every corporate analyst, they were all covering it. And me? I was sitting in my brand new corner office at Sterling and Company, sipping my coffee, watching the empire Daniel built on arrogance and my hard work crumble into dust. At 10 a.m. my phone buzzed. Alex, you are not going to believe this. Emergency investor meeting. Rumor is they're forcing Daniel out. I leaned back, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across my face. Right on schedule. 1 p.m. The final blow. The board called an emergency meeting. Every senior executive, every major investor, and of course Daniel. For the past week he had been spiraling, scrambling, failing. But today the board was done listening to excuses. Gentlemen, Daniel started, forcing his usual smirk. I know things look unstable right now, but I have a plan. A sharp voice cut him off. Daniel, one of the senior board members. Cold. Unyielding. We've already spoken with the top investors. This isn't up for debate. The smirk vanished. We're losing clients. Our stock has dropped 23%. And Sterling and Company has completely outmaneuvered us. A pause. Do you even realize the damage that's been done? Daniel's face darkened. You think this is my fault? A sharp laugh from the other end of the table. You fired the person who was holding this company together, another board member said, pointedly. And now she's using everything she built here to destroy you. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. He knew. He knew exactly who had done this to him. And worse? There wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. 3 p.m. The final nail in the coffin. An internal email. Subject. Leadership update effective immediately. Henry Foster has stepped down as CEO of Carter and Phillips Consulting. I set my phone down, took another slow sip of my coffee, and smiled. Because Daniel never saw it coming. An interim leadership team will be announced in the coming weeks. I read it twice. Let the moment settle. Henry Foster. Out. Fired. Publicly humiliated. Everything he had spent years building? Gone. And yet somehow, it still wasn't enough. At 5:30 p.m. an email came through. From Henry Foster. Subject: Let's talk. Oh, this was going to be good. I opened it. Vanessa, I think we both know things have gotten out of control. I won't pretend we've always seen eye to eye, but we worked together for a long time. I know you're behind this, and I think it's time we put this behind us. Let's meet. Desperate. Predictable. Pathetic. I clicked reply. And I typed, Daniel, there's nothing to discuss. I already told you this isn't fixable. Enjoy your weekend. Then I hit send. And just like that, I closed the final chapter of Henry Foster's career. But my story was only just beginning. The storm had passed. Henry Foster was finished. His empire collapsed. His reputation in ruins. And Carter and Phillips? A sinking ship, flailing to survive. But me? I was just getting started. Monday morning, I stepped into Sterling and Company's headquarters. Not as a former employee looking for a place to land. As their newest senior partner. Position I had earned. Not because of office politics. Not because I played nice with the right people. But because I was the best at what I did. Nathan, the CEO, met me in the executive lounge. A firm handshake. A knowing smile. Welcome aboard, Vanessa, he said. From what I hear, you've already made quite an impact. I returned his smile. I like to be efficient. He chuckled. Well, you're exactly what we need. The clients you brought in, they trust you. And more importantly, they're ready to grow. I nodded, feeling something I hadn't in years. Excitement. Possibility. Control. This wasn't just a new job. This was a fresh start. But I should have known. Daniel wouldn't go quietly. Later that afternoon, my assistant knocked on my office door. She hesitated. Vanessa, you have a visitor. I glanced up. Who? She shifted uncomfortably. Henry Foster. I stared at her for a second, then exhaled slowly. Send him in. A few moments later he walked in. Or rather, what was left of him. His expensive suits. His cocky smirk. His air of untouchability. Gone. His eyes were tired. His face drawn. And for the first time in his life, he looked small. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. He didn't sit. Didn't speak. Not right away. Finally, he let out a humorless chuckle. You really did it, huh? I tilted my head. Did what? His jaw tightened. You destroyed me. I didn't correct him. Because he wasn't wrong. Instead, I simply said, you destroyed yourself, Daniel. He exhaled sharply, staring at the floor. I underestimated you. I nodded. Yes, you did. A long silence stretched between us. Then he said the last thing I ever expected. I need a job. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I just stared at him. Henry Foster. The man who had mocked me. Humiliated me. Called me a worthless dumbass in front of an entire room. And now? He was standing in front of me begging. It was poetic. Perfect. I could have crushed him in that moment. I could have humiliated him. Dragged him through the mud. Made him feel just a fraction of what I had felt. But instead I stood. Walked over to him. Met his defeated gaze. And with absolute calm I said, No, Daniel. A pause. You don't need a job. A little closer now, my voice soft, cutting through the silence like a blade. You need a lesson. His eyes darkened, but he said nothing. I smiled. Cold. Knowing. Final. Good luck, Daniel. Then I turned. Walked back to my desk. And just like that, I dismissed him. For good. That night, I sat in my new office. The skyline stretched before me, a sea of lights. Everything felt different now. For the first time in 20 years, I wasn't just someone's employee. I was the one in control. I thought back to that night. The laughter. The whispers. The humiliation. And now, I wasn't just Vanessa, the disposable employee. I was Vanessa, the woman who built her own future. The woman who proved that loyalty should never be given to those who don't deserve it. The woman who knew her own worth. I picked up my glass of wine, took a slow sip, and whispered the words Henry Foster never saw coming. I win.